Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us again tonight for another workshop on multifamily housing development standards. I'm Brittany Bendix. I'm the town planner, contracted through M Group, and I'm here today with some of my colleagues from M Group as well. We have Tom Ford, who's leading this effort, Poe Johnson, and Susan Avila, who are all working on the development standards. And then we also have Sean Manalo at the end here, who's on my team and works in development review that's helping monitor the meeting tonight. And then we also have Vice Mayor Elizabeth Lewis, who will do some introductions for elected appointees as well.
Diana is on the Zoom. We have former Mayor and Council Member Rick DeGoya with us tonight also. Our city manager is with us, George Rodericks, and that's all I see at this point. I think former Mayor Widmer might be coming there. Oh, we have Stacy Holland, who is one of our council members here also. Stacy, welcome. Okay, thank you. Can I give this to you?
Okay, so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Tom Ford.
Thank you, Brittany, and it's good to be back after the holidays. Keep going here. So we've been starting to develop the draft zoning ordinance. And so tonight we wanted to use this workshop as a way of just bringing forth some ideas and getting people's input and reactions. Next, or I don't see anything here. Just technology at this point.
Yeah, we have a presentation. We're just waiting on the slides to catch up. 1 second.
Oh. What? Can you hear me now? Doesn't sound like I'm very loud. Anyway, so we're going to get started tonight. This is our third workshop, so I recognize some faces. We've had 2 workshops before, and we had a study session. I think some of you have been to all of those. The study session actually was so popular, it got broken into 2 events, 2 evenings. So tonight, like I said, here's just a little overview of our agenda. I'm just going to remind everybody, because it's been, I think, since late November that we were all together, or mid-December. And just want to give you an overview of the process, remind you of some terms that we're using. And then second part is we'll talk about some very specific development issues that we're considering. I don't even want to call them a draft yet, but we're just under consideration. And those will be the issues that we want to focus on tonight. And then we'll wrap up by just reminding everyone what the next steps are. So there we are with the big orange circle. I've already told you where we've been. I should have had this slide up when I was doing that, but we did have the 2 workshops. We had the 2-part study session. So after tonight, we're going to go away and turn some of these ideas that you'll hear tonight into written text that we can then bring as a draft zoning ordinance to the Planning Commission, get their input, and then take it to the council for review and hopefully adoption. So what we're trying to do with this zoning ordinance is enable a range of multifamily typologies. You'll remember that at some of our workshop events, we talked about the large home typology. Because the density is just 10 dwelling units per acre, and most of the parcels are a minimum of 1 acre, we felt that it was an opportunity to look at buildings that resembled a large house but had multiple dwelling units and multiple entries. At some of the meetings, we've also been hearing about not necessarily a preference, but wondering if we could also look into townhomes at the second meeting of the study session between the commission and the city council. They specifically spent some time looking at a townhouse project in Menlo Park. So we're trying to enable that with this zoning ordinance. And then what I call an apartment, it's what's typically developed for a multifamily situation, usually at much higher densities than 10 dwelling units per acre. But still, some of you might call it a stacked flat. Some of you might just call it apartments, garden apartments. It's typically the building has one entry, and once you go inside the building, all of the units have their own entries off of a shared hallway, if you will. So the zoning ordinance will hopefully enable all of these typologies. You'll remember we did talk about the large home typology. We brought some imagery. It's a typology that typically is built in a different era. So we wanted to make sure some of the input we got from you folks was don't forget about the contemporary builders, contemporary construction, contemporary design. The building on the left is actually looks like one unit, but it is actually multiple units in one building. Townhomes, the one on the left is in Mountain View, the one in the middle is in Sunnyvale, and the one on the right is the one that the council and the commission spent a little bit of time at the study session discussing. That's in Menlo Park. So a townhouse typically has an individual dwelling unit entry. Quite often, the parking is behind or beside the entry, so it's contained within the building envelope. So it's a little bit different of a construction typology, but still, we would want to try to enable it with the zoning ordinance. And then there's an apartment typology. As you'll see a little bit later, these buildings probably couldn't be built in Atherton for the types of zoning regulations that we're considering, such as a greatly reduced upper level FAR, floor area ratio, above 21 feet or 2 stories. Quite often, there's an upper level setback too. So there's a lot of shaping the building that these examples wouldn't necessarily meet. But we wanted just to give you an image of what we mean when we're talking about apartment typology. So we've been developing a quite extensive, what we're calling our issues matrix. Using those 3 typologies, we're building a matrix that we can take to the Planning Commission at that meeting, and we'll put it into the staff report, where we look at a whole series of issues and say, how does this get implemented in these different typologies? As you'll see, there's a lot of similarities. Right off the top, though, look at the upper floor setback row. The way of an apartment building is constructed, it might make an upper floor setback a little more difficult. Sometimes they might get a different unit mix. But ideally, what the builder will do is just try to take the same floor plan and stack it, because that's the most efficient and cost-effective way. But for what we're trying to do, it may not be the most effective building. FAR, if you'll remember, that means floor area ratio. It's a ratio of the square footage of total development to the square footage of the parcel. Privacy, all of these issues on the left, we're going to speak to specifically tonight. Privacy has a few different components to it. There's balconies, there's landscape screening, there's wall height, fence height. Where is the wall? Is it on the property line and such? Site access. Since our last meeting, we've spoken to the Menlo Park Fire District. We've also spoken with Green Waste, who's your service provider for recycling and trash, and talked a little bit to them about how their trucks get access to sites, how they would envision a larger density per acre than they're typically used to dealing with in Atherton. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about parking, both parking for the people that live in the building and their guest parking, particularly in the context of a town that has no on-street parking. It's not going forward completely. Oh, there we go. So there was many more issues, as I mentioned, than that just what was in the left column. And all of these we're addressing as we start to draft the zoning ordinance and bring something forward to the planning commission for review. For instance, even though someone might develop an apartment building with one building with one entry, maybe a different applicant might have townhomes that have 8 buildings or 8 individual openings, entries. And so what are some of the standards that we want to say about, is there a minimum distance? Is there a minimum height off the grade? What are some of the design issues that we can put right into the zoning ordinance so that those issues are dealt with? At those meetings that I've been mentioning, we've been hearing a series of comments. I jump right to bullet number 3. That seems like one of the things that I hear the most from folks in Atherton, is the whole issue of privacy, particularly between the interface between the RM10 overlay district and the existing R1A. So privacy and context, what does the town look like? What are we trying to make sure that new development fits into? What is the new development, and how does it fit into what you see as being part of Atherton? So for me, it might be style. For you, it might be setback. So you'll have a neighborhood street, you could look down it and you could see maybe there's a front door that's always 60 feet back from the street. Why don't we wait till I get done, or else you can just actually come up. I think these are great questions.
Well, I just want to make sure. To buy you when you are realizing what you.
Yeah.
So
Right.
Town Planner Brittany Bendix, one of the things that I want to make clear is that in this forum, you need to come and speak into the mic. Otherwise, your comments aren't heard by those individuals on Zoom. And then when we go back and we watch this meeting and we want to make sure that we're capturing everything and vetting our notes, it's really hard to hear in the recording of the meeting anything that's spoken out that isn't spoken directly into the mic. So, and we do have multiple points like we have had in the past for this type of workshop where you can ask questions about specific topics. And then of course, an open-ended at the end to make sure that we catch everything. Great.
And then bullet point number 1, as I spoke to a little bit earlier, we are trying to plan for or enable a series of different types of building types. And some of us at M Group have had conversation with HCD, and this is an idea that they're intrigued by, and they're really happy to understand that Atherton may be pushing towards different types of multifamily housing. It's not that funny. But anyway, so that's what these are some of the issues that we took into account as we were trying to develop our ideas. So tonight, as I said, specifically, we want to talk about some of the things we're thinking along these 4 bullet points. Shaping development, we call it. That takes us back, if you were here for earlier workshops, to setbacks, FAR, floor area ratio, the zoning envelope, the maximum zoning envelope, service and emergency access, which a number of people have asked us to consider, and then parking. So just as a little refresher, if you'll remember, the first thing we do is we assign the setbacks for a parcel. With the maximum height, which for the RM10 is 40 feet or 4 stories. With the maximum height at those setbacks, you get a maximum zoning envelope. It doesn't mean you can develop the full extent, but that's your maximum zoning envelope. You can't develop outside of that. The third concept is floor area ratio. As I said earlier, that's the ratio of the square footage of total development divided by the square footage of the parcel. And what that gets you is basically a window within which all of those things have to work. They have to fit inside the zoning envelope. They have to be no more than the allowed FAR, and they have to be built to the setbacks and no further. So with that in mind, there's different types of development as we've talked about it, or different types of parcels that are being considered as we've discussed at previous meetings. There's 23 Oakwood, which is way up at the top, adjacent to Redwood City, which is long and narrow. And then there's these 7 parcels down near Menlo Park, the Ravenswood Avenue parcels and the parcels along Bay Road. So the parcels along Bay Road and Ravenswood are generally the same. We've averaged them out. They have an average parcel depth of between 174 and 194 feet. They have an average width there's this range, and then they average about an acre in total size. The Oakwood, as I said, is much different. It's much deeper and much narrower. And so what we've developed is a table that I'm not going to try to show you on a slide. However, for those of you that have a paper printout of tonight's show, it's at the back, and it'll also be in the presentation that we post tomorrow morning. We developed a table much similar to your R1A table that takes a way of develops a sliding scale that gets from one size to another, and the side setbacks are correspondingly smaller as you get towards a narrower site. So what that gives us is we're going to look at one specific Ravenswood Bay Roads parcel. It's 175. We're just going to use it as an example. It's one of the parcels under consideration. These are the exact dimensions for those 2 parcels, and all of the ideas about development that we're going to talk about tonight stem from these measurements and these parcels. So the part that what we're considering as our setbacks, if you're at the ground plane in Ravenswood, the front is 20 feet, the rear is 80 feet, and the side is 40 feet. In all cases, the rear includes an adjacency to R1A parcels in all cases. One of the Bay Road parcels actually has R1 on its side as well. So it has an R1 behind and an R1 to the side. Oakwood, on the ground plane for the first 21 feet or 2 stories, the setback is 20 feet in the front, 25 feet in the rear, and 25 feet on the side. Now, on both these parcels, anything above 21 feet or 2 stories sets back even more from that. The Oakwood, it's actually 1.5 for the rear and the side. It's the bottom setback times 1.5, and that's the upper level setback. We have 3-dimensional drawings that I'll show in just a moment. And as I said, this is a methodology that is similar to the way that you modulate side setbacks in particular as parcels get narrower in your R1A district. So that's table 1738010 in your code, and we've developed a table that's similar. So let's look at shaping development on that Ravenswood. These are the setbacks that I showed on the previous slide. We're going to look at a series of things: setbacks, the zoning envelope, and the FAR. And I wrote them all down there at the bottom right so you could remember that not just one of them guides what the development will be. You have to use all of them in combination to get your building. The most important of which is the base density, which is 10 dwelling units per acre in the RM10. So we're looking at setbacks, and this is what we're proposing. So it's a different condition in the front, but we heard a lot of input from the previous meetings that, particularly because in all cases it's an R1A condition behind these parcels, but not beside them. Beside them would be another RM10 overlay parcel. We should try to grab some space in the back, make a larger setback, and take it out of the front. The green area, if you will, is the developable area when you separate out the setbacks. So here, this is the maximum zoning envelope. And again, it's not a building, it's just the maximum zoning envelope. You still have to follow the maximum density, you have to follow the setbacks, which we show, and you have to develop up to the maximum FAR. So the FAR right now that we're considering, you couldn't fill this zoning envelope, but this is where the extent of where your development can touch on the site. Here's 3 different examples of how you might take the floor area ratio and distribute it. What we're considering for the FAR is 0.4. So whatever the acreage is of the site, 40% of that can be square footage of development. Anything over 2 stories or 21 feet can be 0.1. This is similar to what you do with your R1A, in which you reduce the setback or reduce the FAR as the building gets taller. What we're hoping, I know that tall buildings, relatively tall or 4-story buildings are not really looked well upon by most of the people I've been meeting at these meetings. So what we're trying to do is allow the setbacks to be close to make that green box as big as possible, and the FAR sort of squeeze the building down, because what we're trying to do is show people that they can develop all they need in 2 stories, and they don't necessarily have to go to 4 stories. I know that HCD and the council have directed us to look at, well, HCD didn't direct us, but they know that that's what we're looking at. The council directed us to look at 4 stories or 40 feet. And so it's possible, but there's a lot of things that we can do to try to get the development to come in lower. In all of these cases, it's the maximum amount of FAR. These are just building blocks. They're not buildings. They're just chunks of FAR, chunks of square footage, if you will, 10 feet high. And in all cases, they're maxing out the 0.4. So you can see the maximum FAR does not meet the maximum zoning envelope, but the maximum zoning envelope can be used to shape the FAR. So we did this same exercise for Oakwood, but before we go there, I just want to stop and see if people have questions or want to give comments or think our numbers are off. You shouldn't use 0.4, you should choose 0.6 or whatever. And I really encourage people to come up and use the microphone so that the people on Zoom can hear your question or your comment.
Kevin Rule, 97 Frederick Avenue. I was curious, what is the
R1A, it's, I don't know, but the upper floor is 0.7. Is it, 18. So it's 18 total, but the upper floor is 0.7. So the 0.7 has to fit within the 18.
And as I've come to 2 or 3 of these meetings, every citizen that I've heard speak says we do not want to change the existing size of these buildings on the property. And that would be substantially smaller than 0.4. And I think that to be able to change the size and to go potentially 40 feet, which is double the existing standards, makes no sense to fit into the community. And I would strongly ask that you reduce that to a size that's consistent with what we all bought when we, and were limited to when we bought our properties here. So there should be no special consideration for people who want to come into our community and have something different than what we have been able to get, purchase, pay for at full price, and live in. That's the appreciation.
Thank you.
I just wanted to jump in really quickly and clarify on something that Tom said about the council directing us to look at 40 feet. The discussion was more relative to the housing element says that we would consider up to 40 feet. So it's on us to do some due diligence to show what 40 feet would look like if it were ever to move forward. That's also on an assumption that 4 stories fits within a 40-foot volume. That's what was shown in the graphic. And would show the maximum total space in the event that additional sculpting through dormers or habitable upper stories within the roof area wasn't pursued. So right now, it just looks like a box, just to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you.
Make sure we check online before we move on.
Should I try to?
Sure.
So, Jed, if I can call you Jed, I just want to get back to you. I understand what you're saying, but we've been directed to enable 10 dwelling units per acre, less than 40 feet. I hear you. So I just, when you come back to the next meeting, it's not that I wasn't listening to you. It's just that I've been given a job, and that is to enable 10 dwelling units per acre. 10 dwelling units per acre at the R1A floor area ratio would be a pretty tiny unit.
That's what they want, if they want to live in our area. None of them are higher.
Okay, I just wanted to make
Sure
sure.
what you're saying, I hope you do what I'm saying.
I definitely hear you, but I just want to let you know that you won't see your comment realized the next time you see me, but until somebody changes my marching orders. Okay, yes, sir.
Ken Frederick for Lindenwood. I've got two questions. They're really bigger than sort of not. One is, this is a lot of this. You can't believe you've asked this 3 or 4 times. You're gonna hand out something you can read. Turn it 90 degrees, fill the entire quarter box. There's no excuse, right? These little items of a portion of paper. Tonight, doesn't make sense. We've asked this several times. No extra cost, please do that. Secondly, I'm trying to figure out, I think it was January of last year, when, the mayor, Bill, and I think it was, started one of these processes, beginning of the year, talked about the philosophy under which, after the town council was saying, here's where we're gonna put, here's the policy under which we're gonna put these new dwellings. Where and how, transportation, et cetera. What that- I can't figure out where that is now. I have no idea what your charter is. I don't understand what the town council is asking you to do and what the philosophy is. Where do we put these things? Why do we decide it's gonna be Bay Road versus Middlefield versus El Camino? How are those decisions made? What are the big picture items for which you work? I know how you're working, doing a job. I just don't know what your charter is. It'd be nice to know that as a decision.
You want me to take that?
Sure. But that's a really good comment because that's just basically reminding us that we should have reminded everybody here that where this is coming from is out of your housing element. And that's where this started. That's where the sites got selected and such. So I'll let Brittany talk more. Oh.
I'm trying to respond to your question and I'm so excited. I've messed up my setup here. So just give me a second. Okay. So really what we're working on right now is getting an adopted and certified housing element. There's multiple pieces of that that are moving forward simultaneously. The biggest and kind of most time consuming part of that is the CEQA review, which is where we're actually looking at which sites to choose relative to potential impacts. That information has yet to come out publicly in terms of the analysis that's been done. We're really just starting to get the final documents in to be able to publish a draft of the CEQA document over the last week or so. So that's still completely fresh, still being refined, should hopefully be out within the next couple of weeks, and then would have a 20 to 30 day public comment period so that you have time to sit and read it Once that document moves forward, that's at the point that the council would start looking at choosing which sites that they would pick for multifamily, for the multifamily overlay, which is something that needs to happen in order to get that certified housing element. In the midst of that, we also are behind in adopting code standards, design standards, development standards for applying to that multifamily parcel. So at this point, we have a general idea of the sites that we're looking at. And what Tom has done is he's crafted some standards or found some areas for discussion where we can actually start to refine some details that would be applied to any potential site that gets chosen in the future. And this is important because we're trying to maintain our local development standards. If we approve a multifamily overlay and don't have any standards, that effectively means that a developer can still come in and build to the state standards. So we need to do this concurrently. And that is why even though these are somewhat hypothetical sites, we're still looking at them at a fine level of detail so we can craft things like setbacks and heights and FARs. And the council has charged us with basically figuring out how to do all of that at the same time before the town lose their ability to exercise local control. And specifically with this element, with the development of design standards and development standards, it's to create a program for multifamily housing in a town where none has ever existed before. And that is a much larger lift than what a lot of other communities are dealing with, which is more just about upper level setbacks and privacy. We're having to start from the ground up, literally parking, setbacks, density, all of that is pretty fresh to Atherton. Next question or comment?
But Rick and I were at a meeting over in Neighborhood Voices 2 weeks ago. And after that meeting, I had a chance to talk to Lydia through the former mayor of Palo Alto. She said something really, really interesting that I want to share with you all. The number one issue they're having now in Palo Alto is fire. What are they going to do with fire protection and how are they going to address a fire that happens? Because the housing density is now not so tight, the fire trucks cannot maneuver on the parcel. She said that their response time has gone from 4 minutes to 12. 12 minutes is the maximum allowed by the state. And this is their number one issue right now with multifamily. So as I've been thinking about townhouses, I was in favor of them. I spoke about that at the last meeting. I'm not so sure I'm in favor of them anymore. So you really have to think about how are you going to get around that parcel? So my comment I have for tonight. Thank you. Oh, I do have one more. I like your slides. They're very good tonight. Thank you all for having the third neighborhood workshop. I think that people have had a chance to make their opinions known. They have. They don't want more than 2 stories. They want it to look like single family. They want their privacy. They don't want somebody looking at them. It's that simple. That's all there is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not to give my opinion, but to give my perspective on council policy. And I think that, and so I just want to restate what Brittany said, because I think she was going to the right thing. The council didn't give direction to build the 40 feet. 40 feet is in the housing element. When the council was made aware of that, I don't know, a couple months ago, everybody on the council was surprised. Nobody understood that was in the housing element. Everybody on the council said that's unacceptable. So I think the council's perspective is to focus on 2 stories, and if in order to accomplish the design standards and enable multifamily within the context of preserving privacy and the character of the town, if we need to go to those dormer window, third-story units, that's something we would look at. And I think that's what the direction from the council was. The issue of FAR hasn't come up before us, but I would say that it's consistent in terms of trying to maintain the character of the town and the privacy. Those are the absolutely most important things.
Thank you. Okay, and we have a comment from online.
Mr. David Chan, I'll ask to unmute you.
Hello, thank you for having this neighborhood meeting. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it, nor was I able to make the other ones. I guess I had a question, or if somebody on the panel could comment on the FAR and how that will relate to how many units ultimately are built on a property. For instance, if somebody just chooses to build 2 units, would they still be able to utilize this, I guess, 0.4 FAR, which is effectively more than double what you can currently build on the R1A zoning?
Thank you, David. This is Tom. I can answer that. Generally, yes. What you're getting at is that the FAR is a maximum, and so you can divide it across 2 dwelling units and come in and only develop 2 units on your parcel, even though you're legally able to do 10 per acre. Or you could develop more units in that same amount of floor area, so long as you're staying within the limits of the zoning ordinance, which are 10 dwelling units per acre. So you do have that upper limit, but most development in California, you don't have to develop at the maximum. You can develop less. It doesn't make financial sense, but you can develop less. Is that it? Okay, anything else before we move on? Oh.
Thanks, Tom. Brittany, perhaps you could address Mr. Chen's question in relation to how the inclusionary ordinance or the 20% set aside requirement would play into that. That's your financial sense.
Can you remind me specifically what the question was to that?
He's wondering about the FAR. Even though you're allowed 0.4, you have to develop 0.4.
If they're only developing 2 units, one of them may be required to be affordable.
So that shouldn't impact the FAR requirement. If anything, I could see some deviation from the FAR through something like a density bonus program where they, in order to provide more affordable units, they might ask for a concession from the FAR, but that would have to be then demonstrated that the FAR was accommodating the affordability component. If they're building units that don't have to take advantage of the FAR that's allowed, they're not obligated to fill that volume.
Curious, given that question, and the idea is to build a 40% of one of the properties single unit, that is it possible that some other ratio is included in the calculation of FAR or those, and perhaps the other requirements, that it's kind of a per unit measure, like you can't do 40% of the lot if you only build 1 unit. You have to, there's some ratio calculated.
We could, this works much better. We could, have either an average unit size, or we could say on this parcel, no unit may be larger than X, 1,700 square feet or something like that. So if someone did come in and with Mr. Chan's example and only develop 2 units, they would be limited in my example, to 3,400 square feet. So we haven't been considering it. I think it came up at our first workshop, though. How big are these units going to be? And we weren't going to impose a minimum or a maximum. We might impose an average unit size. So if you come in with 10 units and we say the average unit size is no more than 1,200 square feet per unit, somebody could come in with four 1-bedrooms, two bedrooms, and I guess 4 or 2 3-bedrooms, and the aggregate would have to be whatever that number is. Does that sound like an interesting idea, particularly if someone were to come in Mr. Chan's example and only want to develop 2 units, that we wouldn't allow them to go to the full 0.4 FAR? I think it's something to consider.
That'll definitely be something that we will consider, because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that these sites are actually accommodating multifamily housing. We do have an obligation to report to HCD every year on the progress that we're making with the housing element. So it's important that we actually have some successful multifamily development that occur on at least some of these sites.
Okay, I'm going to move on with my brand new microphone. So we're going to basically do the same exercise, but we're going to look at the Oakwood site, and then we'll take another pause for comment. So the Oakwood site, if you remember the table we looked at about 20 minutes ago, we're assigning a 20-foot front setback. This is on the ground plane. 25-foot side and rear. And just to remind everyone, or perhaps tell you for the first time, this parcel, can you use your cursor to show? This parcel is surrounded on the north by there, leave it there. Okay, it's surrounded on the north by Redwood City, and to the back and on the south, it's Atherton R1A. There's approximately, I think, about 5 parcels, Atherton parcels, that wrap this. So what we're looking at is the setbacks. And again, keep everything in, all of these things have to work together: the maximum density, the setbacks, the maximum zoning envelope, and the FAR. So here's the zoning envelope, because we do make the setbacks for anything over 21 feet or 2 stories is 1.5 times the ground plane setback. In this case, it's I think 37.5 feet on the sides and the rear, and it's 30 feet in the front. The FAR, we did 3 different examples to show you kind of how it could get distributed. Based on the 0.4 FAR, the development on this site could be as much as 66,000 square feet. So we've done a version where we show 66,000 square feet in the upper left in 2 stories. Again, try not to think of these as buildings. It's just a distribution of development, if you will. The architects haven't gotten a hold of it yet to give it design. On the upper right, what if you were to max out at 4 stories or 40 feet? Well, then you not only have those upper level setbacks, but you have the FAR reduction above 21 feet or 2 stories. On the lower left, we thought, particularly because of the unique shape of this parcel, it's very deep compared to how wide it is. We thought you might end up seeing a series of detached buildings. So we would have a standard. Right now, we're considering 20 feet, that if you have multiple buildings, there has to be a minimum of 20 feet between them. So what we've done is we've stacked up the 0.4, that 66,000 square feet is stacked up in eight pieces of 2-story development. So each of those little slabs on the bottom floor and the top floor is approximately 9,000, well, it's almost 10,000 square feet. So you can see, you could have, that could be a duplex, a fourplex, it could be any kind of thing. And you would still be hemmed in by the maximum density. The base density is 10 dwelling units per acre. So that's about 16 units on this site. But again, what we're just trying to show really simply, we could have come with 40 different graphics like this of how to distribute the FAR, but we were trying to show that it could be one big building, that you can do it all in 2 stories. You could go to 4 stories, but you would be subject to zoning setback, to setback and FAR limits, or you could go with a series of multiple detached buildings. There's a lot of different ways to look at how to distribute the allowed FAR across that site. So with that, we're going to take another pause and see if people want to comment, because this is the one outlier of all of the parcels we're looking at that is much different than the Ravenswood and Bay Road parcels.
For Ravenswood, we made a comment about side setbacks were smaller, which were adjacent to other R10 parcels. But the rear setback, because it's against R1A, you wanted to accommodate larger setback there because it's R1A. And that rear setback is 8 feet, is what I saw.
I believe so, on the ground plane.
And so now here we're going from 80 up against R1A. So in that situation, you're allowing an 80-foot setback up against R1A. And so Oakwood, only 25 up against R1A. So probably less than a setback for this passing. Is that a reasonable conclusion?
It's a reasonable comment.
For what it's worth, this is Rick. This is our worst nightmare, what we're seeing here, seeing this visualized. So hopefully, when it comes to it, city council finds other locations where the lot form is more suitable. I can't imagine how a fire truck would navigate a long, narrow lot like this all the way to the very back. And have room for mobility. I can't imagine it's a garbage truck, drive it down, right up. That's feet from the neighbor's probably length, 5 feet. Garbage just right by people's bedroom. You're not even insulated from the front setback, right on top. So anyway, I just think the concept of citing 23 Oakwood is misguided, which is not your concern, but looking at how you're trying to jam standards onto this parcel, it's almost wrong. How inconvenient and upsetting it would be to the 6 neighbors surrounding this parcel, 3 of them surrounding. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one online.
Well, Carl Flaherty, that's one of the developers in town. I did study the San Mateo County guidelines for multi-family, and one thing that was very important was guidelines, green space. And again, what Atherton residents don't want to see is a whole bunch of little buildings on one parcel. So this might be a lot where townhouses might make sense in the cluster. And we have the owner of Oakwood right here, so I'm not presume to tell somebody what they should build on their lot. But again, Atherton doesn't want to see higher than 2 stories. Universally, everybody says that. On Ravenswood, the SRI complex, Menlo Park's going to have 8-story buildings in the center. They're only going to have 2-story on the front street, because they still want it to look like a neighborhood out there. We should go with that. San Mateo County, 2 stories in neighborhoods. So that's a tough lot, this long area. But clearly, I don't think we want to see what's in that lower left picture of 10 little buildings, all strung out along. But it might be one where it does make sense to cluster some townhouses, because if you have the access, you're not worried about the fire. Okay, so yeah. But, anyway, my comments, green space, put that in the guidelines. Gotta have a certain amount of green space.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
David Rada, representing the field. I think we've given the city 4 different maps. Just one. And all of them have fire. It's a long skinny lot. And just the whole path to right? That's always been in. In the plans that we've given, we didn't have all stacked up. So one of the reasons why we're still trying to do this is that we lived in store plans. And when my mother passed away, we got the property. And we are not developers. We live there, and we want it to be like it was as much as possible. However, you're faced with a housing element that you've got to take care of. And so this law actually works very well with what we have. So when we get all figured out what we're going to do, then we can do some planning and we can show you. We're going to try to do it nice. There's a grove of trees in the middle, I think, on the first go around. We actually had those saved, and there's still a possibility to save the redwoods. It's not long, but 130 foot long. So, thank you. Oh, and you guys, I wouldn't want your job.
Okay, sir. And then we have somebody online too, but please. No, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jim Young. I'm a resident at 75. And I just want to ask one question. And I just want to understand. Somebody asked about, okay, the location, you've got these locations that you're looking for XYZ. And then also, you said the marching orders for the 10 dwelling units per acre. That would be marching, for sort of the criteria to follow. And I thought, based on what Brittany said, that those criteria and all of that was being written up as sort of as we're going ahead. It was going to be out pretty soon. Is that accurate?
That sounds like an accurate representation of what I said. Just to clarify, what you're describing is the environmental analysis. And what we're working on tonight is okay.
were to propose anywhere in town that their site be developed or rezoned multifamily, some set of these directives would be applied. I understand that there's a separate process for the town. I feel like that's a little serious. Often all of them. They suddenly have this and so you all trying to apply to.
Let me clarify a couple things. The discussion on which sites to include in the housing element has really been ongoing for maybe over 2 years now, maybe even 3. And last year in late January, the council adopted a housing element that included specific sites, and that went to the Housing and Community Development Division of the state for review and certification. The state issued comments back in April, effectively saying that you needed more housing or more multifamily housing to address affirmatively furthering fair housing issues that they identified, along with a number of so-called more low-hanging fruit issues. So we are currently in an environmental review process for the rezoning that also addresses the housing element because of the rezoning, crafting the design standards, and looking at other programs of the housing element, like the inclusionary housing program. The council spent 2 meetings over the summer refining the site selection process just for analysis. And at that point, we did have 2 publicly held meetings where they chose these specific 7 sites for further review among the sites in the POS districts, the public open space districts. The actual final selection of these sites has not yet happened. But moving forward, if they were to add sites to that category, then we would have to go back and reopen the CEQA analysis to make sure that we had done a proper review of any potential environmental impact reports or impacts to that site. That's not to say that won't ever happen. It's most likely going to happen if we submit our revised housing element to HCD and the comments from HCD are, well, you need more sites or you're not doing enough here. So then we would have to go through another version of this process. It would not include this part of it where we're actually developing the zoning code language. It would more just be selecting the sites and expanding that zoning.
This process.
Correct. To any new property that gets rezoned to include this, yeah. Sure. And that's not to say if we adopt zoning code programs for multifamily housing and we get through a couple projects and we have some concerns about how a particular issue is being implemented, we can certainly bring back a zoning code revision to the Planning Commission and City Council. Because at this point, really, the issue is getting something adopted so that we can move forward and get certified. But we can come back and revisit this if we find that it needs some tweaking.
Okay, we have someone online. Oh. We lost our online question. Okay. So any other questions on the Oakwood site before I move on to our next issue that we wanted to discuss tonight? So we're going to switch topics to privacy and screening. You saw a similar image the last time, I think it was at the council study session. And one of the planning commissioners brought up a really great point, and we have to pay attention to egress for fire condition, emergency access. So we talked to the fire district, the Menlo Park Fire District, and then we checked the state code. So what we're thinking of proposing, what we're considering is that for walls facing R1A parcels, basically almost any side of the Oakwood parcel except the front and the backs of the other parcels. Any bedroom would have to be on the right. That's an egress condition. So the maximum sill height can be 44. But any other window that is on that wall facing an R1A, we're considering raising the sill height to 54 inches. What that does, depending on how close the person actually stands at the window, but it starts to alter their view angle, their line of vision. What we've also shown here is, as you may recall from our earlier points, anything over 21 feet or 2 stories needs to set back differently. So this is assuming the ground floor is close enough that the upper floor has to be set back to make the setback requirements. So this is something we're considering for a privacy issue. Just going to talk about a few privacy issues and then we'll take another stop for comments. We're considering putting in language that prohibits balconies and decks on upper level walls facing R1A parcels. We've only drawn the Ravenswood example, but this would obviously be very restrictive on Oakwood. And so what we show is on the wall facing the R1A parcel and for a 25-foot return, along the RM10 side of the building, there is a prohibition. As you can see with that courtyard structure, which is probably about 12 or 16 dwelling units through that front door in the courtyard, that's a condition where you could actually be back on the site, but if your balconies are facing inward or towards the side of the site that is not the R1A, you would be able to have balconies. So again, it's just something we're considering along the lines of how to enhance or increase privacy. Now with landscaping, we believe that there's more bang for your buck, if you will, from a bush than a tree, because the tree has the canopy that people can see under. So and your landscape code 17.50 already has some discussion, some standards for landscaping, but it's actually addressing trees. And we think we can work with your arborist to actually develop language that would start to develop a shrub that would be a minimum of 6 feet high, let's say, in addition to a wall on the perimeter property line that would be 6 foot minimum fence or wall height. And that we would put those landscape standards into this chapter of your zoning ordinance, not refer to the landscape 17.50, but to put all of these landscape requirements that are trying to get at increasing privacy for people on both sides of the property line, actually. But it would be incumbent upon the development to install this. And I think that's the last before we take a little pause. Yeah, we're going to take a little pause. So there on the right is just a reminder of some of the things I just talked about: balconies, screening, wall height. And we'll pause for any questions, comments, or discussion that we can have along this line.
We talk about privacy. Some people go forward and talk about precluding pools and play structures. You get to a pool in the backyard and you have 6 to 8 to 10 families out there. And you like you're living next door to one. It can be totally uninhabitable adjacent properties. And I'd like to make sure that that is something that is excluded.
Thank you.
We're gonna have 8-foot fences. Why are we not gonna have 8-foot fences here? If you have multifamily, maybe you are, but absolutely, we should have an 8-foot fence required. If you have totally full, mature landscape screen, that might be okay. You take whatever arborist figure you get for growth and double it. Because that's how long it's gonna take. And I'll give you an example of English, laurel. We put it at one house, we were told it's gonna be at 6 foot within 3 years. At 5 years, it wasn't even at 6 feet. 6 feet is nothing, nothing. So if that's gonna be the standard, forget it. Privacy, love the window idea. Balconies, after our last discussion, I decided to take a little road trip. I went to see the apartments over by Stanford. What did I find on the balconies? Bicycles and barbecues. I don't think we want that. So I'm actually opposed to balconies, whether they're outside or inside on the structure. Thank you.
Wait, hold on a second. Let me ask you a question. So you said you would recommend 8-foot minimum for fence height. What was the minimum on the shrub? 8?
8 feet?
Okay.
Absolutely. And I agree with you, trees will not do it, but the shrubs have to be really packed together. You know, they can't be every 15 feet.
Right.
And it has to be certain species, so the arborist should actually indicate which ones are fast growing. And evergreen, of course, and shrub would be evergreen.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Tom Doherty with Sardinia. My concern specifically is it's pretty clearly delineated. I'm not really kind of conceptual here. I'm imagining in my mind's eye standing in my backyard and looking over the fence, which is probably about 7 or 8 feet high already. And I'm looking over the fence, and 37.5 feet from my fence, which is not that far, is a window, and it looks right into my pool. So the concern is that all of what I'm reading here, and even what Carol is suggesting, is still a catastrophic loss of privacy in my specific case, and which I think needs to be addressed, because if you're making standards for anything, it should be for 23 Oakwood, because that is the only parcel currently on yellow. My concern is longevity, because, you know, what happens is it gets developed, they throw some plants in the ground, and they call it a day. Tree dies, shrub dies, whatever, things are supposed to get high, and block to give us eventual privacy, and that probably doesn't happen. I mean, if we get lucky, maybe. But who's managing the efficacy of the screening long term? That's a concern. That maybe that could be written into the standards, that there's some easements that whoever the property owners are, whether it's HOA or whatever, somebody is responsible for maintaining that to a standard into perpetuity. And then with all the garbage trucks that are going to be driving down the length of this property right outside my bedroom window, I hope that there would be language in here that this would be a masonry fence, something that would actually stop sound, so I don't get woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning when the garbage truck rumbles down and dumps 8 cans in a row right outside my window. So these are all thoughts I'm having about that. Yeah, maybe 10 feet for a fence.
No, 10 feet.
Although I don't know how you make a landscape buffer at Oakwood, because you're gonna need to have a road in there somewhere, so. And yeah, as deep, as wide, as high, as tall, as effective, and as managed as possible in perpetuity. Whatever standards would be appropriate for ensuring, I guess, is what I would ask you to consider. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can you get to the specific of which height would be facing the can it get down to that level, or are you specifying the sill height and all of the higher leaders are facing Ravenswood, for example. So obviously that's site specific. How is that going to?
Well, you always trust the developer, right? I'm not sure I know exactly what you're asking, but first of all, if it's a bedroom with one window, you can't go less than, I think, 44 inches. Right now, I think if you remember the red line that we showed for balconies, I think it would be similar to that. So if it's a wall that's, wall that's facing the R1A or maybe even a certain return, that this requirement would be a prohibition, that any non-bedroom or second window in a bedroom would have to have the higher sill height. We'll probably do something like walls parallel to or offset, some certain angle. So if somebody comes in and they just put their facade at an angle, they can't say, oh, I'm not looking at the R1A. So we'll probably establish a minimum and a maximum angle of the facade from the R1A parcel line. And then all of those parcels would be subject to a higher sill height for non-egress conditions. Correct. You change the state fire code. That would be the way. Mean mandate no bedrooms on this side of the house?
So I think that's one of the reasons that the approach was to provide a more gracious setback towards the rear. And then to clarify, when development occurs and we have a standard like this, there is a final inspection that would verify that that window placement was consistent with whatever plans were approved by planning. So it's not just, we send it out and we hope the developer finishes it. We actually do go out and make sure that that was complied with.
Martin, for those comments. It does seem possible to me that the zoning ordinance could just simply say you can't have windows on the second or third story on the side of the property, the side of the building that faces the R1A zone. So you can just prohibit windows at all on that facade above a certain height. And I also don't know why you couldn't simply mandate that those have to be higher window sills, and that would effectively prohibit bedrooms on those, or bedroom windows that only had, or bedrooms that only had a window on that facade. And so I think you don't have to write the standard as liberally as what was suggested, but you could restrain it more in the design standard to increase privacy on those facades. Thanks.
Sure, I understand. Just what you're describing though is you'd be looking out your back of your house at a barn, right? I mean, if it's just a blank wall, well, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. So are they still there? And then I think I understand completely what you're saying, but I think some of the kinds of things we've been discussing with you all are development constraints to such a degree that we would have to identify them in the housing element. For instance, it's been asked that we mandate all parking be underground. We can't do that at this density. HCD is going to have certain things they'll flag. It's not just about a waiver if a density bonus comes in. So we have to be careful if we come in with a standard that says, oh, by the way, on the back side of this building, there's no windows above the first floor. So at some point we have to pick our battles. But I completely hear you. So no one else on. Okay, we're going to move on. Service and emergency access. We've heard a little bit about this tonight, just from some of the people here. And it sounds like, um, Mr. Araga, I think you've developed plans where you've actually worked with the fire department. So we called them and got into this a little bit because people asked at one of our previous meetings. So we've looked into a little bit about what we can do about what the zoning ordinance can do to regulate fire access or emergency access and trash recycling access. So what we're considering is, because we talked to Green Waste, which is the town's current service provider. They don't have any requirements for bins, the number of bins that they'll have at a certain property, but we could perhaps impose that. So for instance, if there's more than 6 dwelling units in a site, rather than having 18 individual carts, 18 individual carts, because there's 6 dwelling units, they would have to go to a bin and an enclosure situation. So the bin is the thing that the truck picks up, the big one. And we, in the zoning ordinance, as design standards, would start to talk about what is the enclosure? Is there a gate? Is there a roof? What are the materials? What are the colors? Where is it located? If it's less than 100 square feet, it's not an accessory building in your code currently. So depending on the size, there might be some limitations we might want to put on its location. So that's the number we're using right now. 6, we're considering that. In terms of like how it actually gets handled, like for instance, this gentleman says he's been developing plans. So his architect actually develops the plans for how the fire gets in and out. And then when the building permit gets given, they would deal with that then, both for trash recycling and emergency access. When we talked to the Menlo Park Fire District, they said that what they currently require is anything greater than 150 feet. They will require a turnaround. If it's less than 150 feet, they'll allow a truck to come in and back out. At the time of the building permit, when the actual architect is coming up with construction drawings, they will negotiate both with the trash hauler and the fire district. And there may be other alternative methods of compliance. For instance, they could install a fire hydrant back at the 150 feet and it works and it's hooked up to water. So as you can see, 150 feet on what we're looking, this is not Oakwood, but 150 feet on Ravenswood gets you outside the developable area. There could be an accessory building back there because the accessory building setback is 10 feet currently in Atherton. So, but it would be an issue that would be developed with the architect at the time of the building plans and the fire district. Oh, sorry, wrong way. Okay, so I'm just going to stop there. Basically, I just dumped a lot of information out about trash and recycling, about emergency vehicles. And so what I'd like to hear from you, like, is 6 the right number for demanding that they go from carts to bin? And what should we be thinking about for enclosure standards if they do have a bin?
Have some experience with this because I'm in fourplexes in Idaho. And each fourplex has to have an enclosure, trash enclosure. Has to be over 5 feet tall, 6 feet tall, must be a solid enclosure with doors. Nobody closes the doors, nobody. Everybody throws the trash over the top and the trash is always on the ground. Constant battle. I'm in a building in Savannah, Georgia, office building where you have to have, it has a big enclosure. Because of the radius that you have to turn with the garbage truck, you have to have a circular drive around. So be thinking about that, when you're gonna have to have a circular drive around the backside. So key points. Six dwellings with recycling, that is probably what, 15 trash cans, because you have to have
18.
X number, 18 trash cans. We're gonna have 18 trash cans on the street?
I'm asking you,
So,
what's the number, 4? You said fourplex in Idaho?
there are no trash cans. You have to have an enclosure.
Mhm.
Period. And oh, well, in our area. I mean, not saying general, but I don't think you want 18 trash cans on the street. Quite frankly, I don't want it. So I think that would be outrageous. I would say the maximum number on the street, because you already have is about 6. A lot of people have 6 out there with all the green that are out there. But, you know, we gotta look at trash cans, we gotta look at mailboxes also. Do we want 10 mailboxes out front? Are you gonna put mailboxes in the enclosure? So back to the dumpsters. The dumpsters, at least where I have mine, they have to have top. It can't be an open dumpster. It can't be a portable one. You can't have it on wheels that you take out the street. You, have to have it with a solid enclosure, and that solid enclosure in Atherton should be somewhat consistent with the style of the house. And so it can't be chain link with slats if the house is siding or stucco. It has to be something somewhat compatible. Has to be, I would say that the enclosures are probably a good 5.5 feet to 6 feet up. Has to have a door, and the door has to be able to be, have a post that goes into the ground, so it can't just swing over. It can't just be a lock that comes over it. It has to be a post into the ground that encloses the doors. That's it. Thank you.
Odor placement of the bin, because
That.
of odor.
Back corner is where it is, where we are. Cannot be in front, cannot be on the side, has to be in the
That
back.
could be adjacent to a, 1A property where we have to put the backyard and stuff.
This is not adjacent, it's not within 4 feet. It's, and it really should be shielded. You know, it shouldn't be visible from the street, because typically what's gonna happen, they'll put it down the driveway. And if you have straight driveway going back and nothing in there, what are you be looking at? A dumpster.
Don't behind any restaurant, you smell the dumpsters.
You do. And it's gonna have all the kitchen trash right on the ground. So property management is going to become very important on these parcels as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to weigh in on this or not, but I'm the code enforcement officer. South Africa. Pardon me now, it's a little bit cold. A couple of things to consider on this, because I do enforce on the trash cans now. One of the thoughts that I had on this issue is that the green bins will not be quite as much of an issue, because you don't have as many trees and landscaping on the property. Screening won't have as many of the landscaping issues to worry about, so you're not going to have as many trash cans. You won't have 3 per residence at this point. Like you have some compacts and doors with paint outside there or whatnot that are all sitting out there. So I don't think that that will be as much of an issue as we're looking at on here. Speaking, I have issues right now where I have residents that are butted up against the schools where the dumpsters are at the back of the property, and they listen to loud noise when they're getting collected. They're getting the smells from those, even though they're not food service trashes or anything of that nature. They're not green waste, such as food, you know, things of that nature. So having them at the back of the property has already created an issue with the schools that we have now. I'm not trying to be negative, Nancy. I'm just thinking of, you know, alternatives for you to think about for problems that we have now that are not being faced. Transients that walk around the town now, that go through our trash bins to find recycling, that we get the calls from the PD on. I think getting a big dumpster bin out there, whether or not we have to police it or close it or have these things happen on the outskirts of town where a lot of these properties might be located, could create a problem. I'm thinking just in my mind sight, having the regular bins and finding a number to per resident, maybe be 3 green bins for the entire site, or for average of your landscape that's out there, to be realistic on something like that, or having landscapers who have bins or the big trucks that carry the landscaping for that property for maintenance might be a better idea than having and hiring a service, having the property managers hire a service where they have the trucks that remove the landscaping so you don't have to move it. And then as far as your compost, maybe a compost bin or 2 compost bins for the entire site. If they want to have food stuffs that go out through those services. And then perhaps the recycle bin, the black bin, the blue bin, for each residence, and that'll bring it down. I know it's a large number, but we do have a lot of services here for our residents that are a single family home that have literally going on in their houses every single week. So that's not something that we're not familiar with. We have that happening on a regular basis. So I don't think that it's blown up proportion too much. I think the green bins are where we get. Well, honestly, from what I've seen in other properties, I think about that from where we are now. But I think that the bin would be an attractive nuisance that would create more problems for us if we had something like that and shelf. And also for the trucks not to have to go back to property and interfere with properties around us, we have that in schools. And we get complaints from the neighbors. Clamoring around their area, and that's just with the school once a week.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Mark again, and I think a lot about this now. Backing up. Traffic trucks maybe. Whatever. I do think it makes a lot of sense to not let people design the property in such a way that you're going to require backing those trucks every time somebody collects the trash. Those things tend to be very loud. Beep, beep, that thing.
Louder.
And I don't think specify it because it's obviously site specific, but not having the dumpsters and the enclosures facing the R1 properties. They're that our case breaks down that. Have them somewhere where they are enjoyed by the residents or the traffic. And definitely, yes, please do design specifications for the. And then on Ravenswood with like the traffic and the lights would.
There's a council member on. My opinion. I think that this is a tough problem, and I think you need to look at what other communities that are small communities that have multifamily units in those communities, what they do. Because we don't have experience with that, other than with our schools. And our schools, you might look at exactly what the public schools are doing, because they have less property than private schools. But my gut tells me that the best place to put the bin is not on a fence line, because you're gonna run into the neighbors. So if it's on a fence line, and I live on a cul-de-sac, and I know what, and every garbage day, the garbage truck has to do a 90-degree turn, and it takes 4 turns to get around at the end of this small cul-de-sac. And I get woken up at 6 a.m. every garbage day because of it. And anybody who lives down next to a property line where a garbage truck's going to go, where it has to get turned around, it's going to wake up. It's just unavoidable. I would say my gut tells me the best place for a bin is at the back of the lot of the building, facing not on the edge of the property, but on against the building, facing wherever the largest setback is. based on what you said for Ravenswood would be at the back. Based on what you did for Oakwood, looks like an unworkable situation. I don't know how you have it. Seems unworkable. In order to minimize the disruption to people, I'd like to see the bin somehow enclosed at the front of the property, but you've got to be able to screen it, and I don't know how that works, so I think it's a very difficult problem.
Oh, now we do have someone online.
Yes, David Chan, I'll ask you to unmute.
Hello again. I'm having a hard time hearing some of the comments, but from what I could hear, I think I would like to re-echo. Previously, someone mentioned about the hours for pickup. Just to make sure that the hours for trash pickup, I'm not sure what's in the ordinance now, but I imagine for multifamily dwelling, especially if we're going to limit the number of bins they have, that they may end up needing multiple days of pickups. And just to make sure that those hours are in keeping with what residents would expect for quiet enjoyment. And also, since I think I heard mention that this discussion isn't just truly specific to the two properties in question, but really for developing the multifamily ordinance for other potential future sites, that the correct sort of requirements are made for trash enclosures, such that they're not just considered an accessory building, because that would allow them to be really close to neighbors, especially if there are one zoned. It might not make sense to have a trash enclosure 10 feet, away from a single family home type of thing.
Okay, thank you. Was that it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, let's move on. The last issue that we brought tonight, before we get to a place where we want to just throw the floor open to any other issues you'd like to speak about, is the issue of parking. So right now, Atherton, I think I've mentioned this at previous meetings, Atherton doesn't have a parking ordinance. So in a sense, we would be writing into, does he need to speak again? Oh, we would be writing into the RM10 ordinance some parking requirements. So these are the considerations we're using right now. 1 space per bedroom. So if someone has, you can do the math, if someone has 10 studios, they would have 10 spaces. If they had 5 studios and 5 2-bedrooms, they would have 15 spaces. And then assigning a minimum of 1/2 guest parking at 1/2 space per dwelling unit. So, and that would have to be handled on site as well. Brittany brought up a really interesting idea with me today. Do we want to impose a maximum so that someone at the planning level gets their project permitted, and then months or years down the line, they come in with their building permit and they've got the minimum, they've also got a lot of parking covering their parcel. So sometimes other towns and cities have a formula where you might say the minimum is well, the maximum is 1 point something times the minimum. So maybe let's say 1.5. So a minimum of 1 space per bedroom, a maximum of 1.5 spaces per bedroom. It's something to consider. We can talk about it at the end when we take a pause. The locations that we're working with, if it's resident parking, it has to be within a building or an accessory building. So as I said earlier, townhomes quite often have a parking space that's alley fed, or it might be a parking space that's immediately adjacent to the front door, but it's within the building envelope. So the parking either needs to be in a building, in an accessory building such as a garage or a carport. And if it's a carport, it must be enclosed on 3 sides. At previous meetings, we heard people talk about what about the effect of headlights as somebody's trying to park their car. For guest parking, we're saying it would be surface. You don't have on-street parking, so everything would have to be accommodated on the site. The parking, we've shown this red hatch showing where parking, surface parking for guests would not be allowed. So right up against the RM pen, it would follow your accessory building setback of 10 feet. But against the R1A, that surface parking would have a 60-foot setback, which is similar to the rear setback of a R1 parcel. The other thing we'd love to hear from you folks on is what kind of standard we might be needing to put in with regard to, somebody's moving. So they have a truck come in and the truck's going to be there for 8-10 hours. Should we mandate that there's a space on site for those trucks, ride share? Somebody gets dropped off by Uber. Do we need to make sure that there's an area? Deliveries, they have their DoorDash come in with dinner. Is there a place that we should, in the zoning ordinance, demand that it be designated as sort of a loading ride share area? Those are the issues we wanted to bring. So again, I'm going to pause for discussion, and on the right is the bullet points of a whole series of things that I just spoke about. And you'll see some question marks for places where I put a question out to you folks. Do we need to establish a maximum? Do we need to establish an area where loading and rideshare might take place? So with that, we'll throw it open to any comments that people have or questions.
Slide 31, the red house area. Raven, side that faces the R1A is got a 60-foot no parking area. What about how's it worked at Oakwood?
What do you suggest? I have a feeling I know.
Hold on, because when we've been discussing this at council about the concept of multifamily housing, and we were so catastrophically dismayed that Oakwood was selected. That, well, you'll have control with objective design standards, because that's where you get to fit the context of the town. Well, the context of the town is there's no multifamily housing anywhere. So there's no parking ordinance in Atherton because there's no need for one, because these lots are so big that people just park in their massive driveway, right? And no neighbors are inconvenienced. But in this case, the only way, in my opinion, that a neighbor cannot be inconvenienced from an absolute army of cars is if it's underground parking access at the front. That's at Oakwood, which is the only thing we should really be talking about, because everything else is a concept except for Oakwood. So that's what it should be. And if that's not affordable, then that's a problem for HCD to reconcile, because the property is $8 million an acre, can't be affordable anyway. Objective design standards were sold to the citizens of Atherton as where we get to fit this into the context of the town. And the context of the town is the neighbors don't get inconvenienced by an army of cars. I can't think of what else.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sure. That's the discrepancy. Setback. Square lots might be able to work, right? I see you're able to accommodate R1 setbacks when it's more square, but long and narrow like Oakwood, it just seems, Rick's words, unworkable. So I would encourage you to
you know, but I don't know how, there's this fear of putting in restrictive building standards for fear that HCD might reject them. Let them reject them. It's the will of the people.
No, they won't reject the standard. They'll reject the housing element.
That's something needs to have a conversation about. Said, I would understand why there's not more of a dialogue with HCD about some of these municipalities that multi-family housing down those municipalities. Something's got to get.
Okay, thank you. Carol.
So months ago, I wrote you all, the council, and I wrote you, Brittany, some ideas on all this jazz. It was the Great American Melbourne, you probably threw it in the trash, but anyway, it might be good to go back and relook at it. So, I'll speak on behalf of the Housing Coalition. Nothing short of underground parking is going to appease us. That's, the holy grail. As a builder who's building right now, I can tell you, I really know construction cost. I honestly don't think that underground parking is going to cost more than having garages down the back. I really don't. And you're gonna take up land, you're gonna have underground area anyway for storage and for mechanical rooms, because you're not gonna have room in the building. So you're gonna be down there to start with. But let me go to some of this other, carports. I can't believe we didn't consider carports, because what really happens in a carport, it becomes your storage bin. You want to be looking at the bicycles and the boxes and whatever else is going in there, and the yard tools and everything that's gonna be stored. So I don't think we want carports. I'll just speak for myself, and I'm quite sure the Housing Coalition would go with that. I didn't think we were considering that. So we should not have carports. And I can pay the gift of experience of having fourplexes, some of which have carports. I've seen car engines in the carport where the people were fixing the car. Vehicles. No commercial vehicle should be allowed to be parked on the parcel as a resident. I'm not talking about somebody that comes to repair. But if we're gonna have low income, a lot of lower income people have landscaping trucks, they might work in a trade that should not be allowed to be parked on permanently, every day on the parcel. So in Boise communities where I have rental houses, no commercial vehicles are allowed, period. You can have it for repair, but you cannot have it in a single family home. So you think you have to define what's a commercial vehicle, and usually the CCNRs have a definition of what is a commercial vehicle, a certain tonnage, a certain size, something like that. It's not necessarily one that has a sign on the door. I just, if you're gonna have 10 units per acre, you can't assume that a one-bedroom unit has one person with one car living in it. I think you have to assume that a certain percentage are gonna have two people in that one-bedroom apartment, and they're each gonna have a car. So I don't think you have enough parking up there, which then goes back to everything about underground parking. And if you put these garages out back, I think you have the potential for some fire maneuverability issues. I don't know, you have to study it. We may be looking at some circular drives that have to go around as well, because you're not gonna have enough turning radius, for all these vehicles going in and out, and probably at the same time of the morning. So you're probably gonna have to have two driveway entrances on the parcel. Just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think your parking requirement is something some maximum is probably appropriate. I can't disagree with what Carol said. You've got one bedroom, you've got one parking space. There's gonna be lots of times where you have two cars. You gotta have 1.5, maybe you need two. that there aren't any houses built in Atherton today that don't have a basement. So the reason for that is principally because you get free square footage. And it costs $8 to $10 million an acre. So anybody who's building is putting in the maximum square footage they can put in, even if they don't need it, which those of us that have lived here a long time, that seems totally ridiculous because we want smaller properties, not larger properties. Our kids are gone. But that's what's happening. Just look at the problem at the houses that are being built. Even though there's only 2 people in them, they tend to max out at the square footage because the cost of the property so much. And they all have basements, almost all of them. I mean, building department can give you the exact percentage, but it's very high percent. So even under this kind of a unit, I think a developer is going to look at putting in a basement. And if they're going to put in a basement, you got to require there's going to be parking. I think that you've got more room to work with on Ravenswood, but you can't, but if you were going to have parking down the side as you show possible around the structure, nobody can drive in a 10-foot, down a 10-foot width. You got to have more than 10 feet. So if that's a parking structure on the side where you've got the light there, nobody can drive to the back. You've got to allow at least on one side, whatever the minimum is required for the car to drive. Because I've got 10-foot setbacks from accessory buildings on my property and nobody could drive down that. I think on Ravenswood, you got to require them to park. I don't think there's another option. I don't see how it works. But I think you got to require them to park. The lot is just too narrow. With respect to the question, sorry, I meant, with respect to the question about loading and rideshare, I don't think you need to create a spot for rideshare. People are gonna do rideshare at the edge of their property on the street, just like everybody does now. And I'm not sure how you deal with deliveries again. I look at other small towns that have multifamily, how they deal with that delivery issue. My guess is that it's pretty workable. People are going to be in touch on the phones generally, the delivery person and the person receiving. And if it's somebody dropping off a package, there probably should be a place they can put the package rather than on the street. It's going to be dropped on the street.
Thank you. Hey, anything else? Is there anybody online? Well, I really appreciate everybody, whoops, wrong way. Everybody speaking tonight. But we have one last slide, and that's, is there something else, some other development or design issue that you'd like to speak to that we didn't cover tonight? Or even if we haven't? Yes.
It wasn't clear. And it's supposed to be, men are bad communicators. And old men are worse. So be as clear as I possibly can. The problem I see is when I come to these meetings, go back to my friends, they'll ask, gee, Ken, how do I know if my property's on the list? Or how do I know if my neighbor's property's on the list? And the answer, and how, by the way, how will the council decide whether it should be on my list? I can't answer those questions. I mean, you guys are a great job on the standards of building, but the real question is where? How does anybody know where they're building? How they'll be building? You're talking about. But I do not have anything telling you where they're going to put and what's under what criteria, where they will go. And once they're going there, how will I and my neighbors all know for certain what's happening and what's coming in? So maybe I missed all of it. But as I said earlier, I mean, the work that Elizabeth and Bill did was pretty straightforward, talking about the criteria. Remember that one big meeting where you guys had all the charts? It was very clear. People understood it. They didn't agree with all of it, but they understood it. Now people don't know what it is.
So I think you're the person who brought up the black and white, really tiny images earlier in the meeting. Right. So when we get you a bigger one, and also tomorrow when it's available online, if you look at slide 13, That will identify all of the sites that we're looking at. Or if you follow, again, that's what Brittany was speaking about earlier. In the summer, there was a couple of successive city council meetings, and they picked a series of sites to go forward with for potentially, for at least studying at an environmental level for housing element sites. So this is all coming out of the housing element. So any meeting that talked about sites, and there'll be more, I assume, you would have seen those sites. But for right now, look at slide 13. The next site,
So at this point, there's no discussion to even add additional properties. And as I mentioned earlier, if that were to happen, it would likely happen after we've already adopted updates to the housing element, gotten through the CEQA process, submitted the housing element to HCD for certification, and they send something back to, they send a letter back to us saying that we didn't include enough sites or that we don't have enough units. And at that point, we'd go back through the public process that we've been going through effectively since May of this year. Going back to the drawing board, looking at, do we want to upgrade or increase the density at on all of these sites that we're talking about now? Is that what HCD is asking us to do? Or do we need to look at adding more sites throughout the town? So as Councilmember DeGolia just pointed out, there is also a list. There's a table on slide 37 at the back of the packet that we printed out, but then it'll also be online. That was a table showing our work in terms of how we calculated the average widths and depths that we showed on a previous slide, where we were talking about what the setbacks would be. And that's because we wanted to make sure that you had all of the data on the lot widths and the lot depths, but not without substantial public notice and discussion with the council.
And I might add that there is no express standard for selecting these sites. It is capricious, it is not based in any facts whatsoever. There was no notice given to adjoining homeowners. They give notice for taking out oak trees, but they don't give you notice if they want to steal your property away. And that's what's happened in particular on Bay Road and Ringwood. There was no notice. There was even express statements that these were not going to be included, that were put out in the public, and no notice that they were going to be put back in, so nobody came back for those meetings to say that we don't want that to happen, like be treated like every other citizen in Appleton who has the right to their privacy and the lifestyle they pay for and have lived in.
So as I discussed previously or pointed out, this has been a nearly 3-year process. Sites were brought up at the very beginning of this process. Sites came off a list, were added back on. Again, the efforts to add additional sites that occurred this summer were in response to feedback from HCD that came in during the spring. All of the meetings where the sites were discussed were noticed to adjacent residents, actually a 500-foot radius.
Our property, I will take that back. I
Sure.
can tell you, no one on Ringwood who provided notice, express notice, there's a meeting to those properties.
Okay, we can certainly look at that for you and give you that information. I don't have it on me tonight, but I can go and look at the housing element meetings have had, the decision-making meetings have had mailed notices, advertisements in the paper. They have been shared with the social media. There is usually a newsletter that the city manager sends out.
You can show me.
Yeah,
I'll take that back. Tell you,
sure.
everyone on Ringwood, not one person why would anyone be worried about community meetings and having to actively go and look and see if there's still part of it that they go, still along the part?
Well, with the allegation that anybody was specifically removed from the list, this is something that we outsource to a third-party company to do the mailings for us. So there wouldn't have been any direct involvement in staff stuffing mails or mailers and taking envelopes out of a distribution. Oh, and you're discussing the notion that at one point there were sites that were included on the list for the housing element, then they were taken off and then they were added back on. Yes. This happened before I was here, but I do acknowledge and I understand that that occurred. And what I was getting at, I know that this was not necessarily the situation for 23 Oakwood. So I'm looking at the neighbors back there, so they know I'm acknowledging that this is different for your property. For the Ringwood and Ravenswood sites, those were added back in over the summer specifically to address comments that came back from HCD in April and after. I'm sure any sort of public notification went out or any indication was given that indicated that those sites had been previously removed.
Country throughout the state.
That's acknowledged too. In fact, one of the reasons that we delayed making a final decision until September is because we know that within this town, so many residents are actually out of town throughout the summer. So we had a meeting in May, July. May introduced the comments from HCD. July then started focusing on. I'm gonna complete my sentence and then we can get back to your question. We had a meeting in July and then we had a meeting in September, as I mentioned. And that's actually because we did that delay. That's one of the reasons that we're missing the January 31st deadline and getting in our zoning code adoption.
There's no understanding of what this whole process is at this point, other than if you're next to a property that's expected to have 6 to 10 people living there, families living there, you're gonna lose your property rights. You're gonna have a reduction in the value of your property. You're gonna have unacceptable living conditions. And that's what is happening to people living as a result of this proposal. And we will strenuously reject any inclusion of those properties in the
Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would say it definitely gives me more urgency in opening the envelope mark to the resident of, like, you might have built that up on the site, left that in time, and opened it, very surprised. So obviously, I guess just encouragement of notification for neighbors. I was just going to say, one resident brought up, not to have recreational facilities outside on these properties, that we would strongly urge you to the extent you can, to build in prohibitions against outdoor recreation, pool, pickleball. We brought it before, you all didn't mention much of it on the table today, but that's still important to residents. And then I'm curious, has there been, or will there be a discussion on the impact for traffic? And maybe for the site selection process, but is that done? Is it still to come? Ravenswood is a pretty busy street and intersection of Ravenswood.
So that analysis will be part of the CEQA documentation that comes out in the near future.
See what you guys found.
Correct. Yes. That'll come out in the next couple of weeks. So we will be publishing it online. We will also send out a notification. We will announce it on our social media as well, and there will be a link that you can download. The required notification or public notice period, it's not so much public notice, it's actually more public review and comments. That'll span between 20 and 30 days. The nuance there actually depends on whether or not we have to send it to HCD. So at this time, I'm not totally sure if it's 20 or 30 days, but that will be a hefty document. You're looking at, I think the draft I just saw was 115 pages. And then it has technical studies that support the information in there. And based on your comments, you're going to want to take a look at the transportation analysis and the traffic and the transportation impact analysis.
So that is not being noticed, so specific address residents, we just report it on the website.
We will send out a notice citywide that is available. So you will get that, the postal mail. It will also be noticed in the paper through an advertisement, and then again on our website and social media. It will be going out to everybody because it's a town-wide change. And yes, we will be noticing it out to everybody 500 feet beyond the town property line. I'm anticipating the question. Is that what you were going to ask?
Outstanding tonight. I thought we were gonna have the same slides, Tom, that you and Brittany have been showing before, and I almost didn't come tonight because of that. That would have been marvelous for you all. But anyway, it's been specific. I really understand where you're headed, some directions that you're going into, and I thank you for having that specificity. I also wanted to say that, I really don't think a lot of the residents of Atherton understand what's going on. Because when I went to our neighborhood voices, we had 22 families. It was like multifamily was brought up for the first time. I couldn't believe it. They don't really understand. And honestly, even though 1,500 are signed up for the newsletter, they don't read it. I don't read it all the time. If you're gonna have an important meeting for the city council, you need to send a postcard out. And the other thing is, sometimes we only post things 48 hours in advance. We gotta post important stuff a lot more than 48 hours in advance. Last comment, I think that it does have to be simple. When you're putting things out to the public and they haven't been involved in the process for a year, and they've never built anything before, they have no idea what FAR is and this, that, and the other. So I know when I read the ADU guidelines, it's written in municipal mumbo jumbo. And it's long. And so I think it has to be just a summary of the key points, like, you're going to have, so they understand you're going to have parking all around the perimeter. You're going to have X number of trash cans up front. You're going to have a dumpster in the middle of the which I actually like. But you're going to have a circular drive for that. And just, these key points that they would probably care about. Or the key points of what you're thinking about. And I guarantee you have 300 people, here again, if they really understood what is coming down the road, on it. So, but thank you. It's been a great meeting tonight, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I guess, unless anybody has any final comments, I guess that's it. And thank you for coming. Workshop number 3.
One more slide.
Oh, one more slide.
I'm sorry, we have one more slide. It's really just next steps. We kind of touched on it already. It's that we're going back, we're going to work on a draft zoning ordinance. The next step then would be taking it to the planning commission review and then to the city council for review and approval. And Carol actually made some good points in terms of how to make this easier to digest when you actually see the zoning ordinance. I'm sorry, can members of the public please quiet down? Carol. So this is getting actually, Carol, to your point. So when we move forward with these hearings, what you will see is a staff report and then attachments. The staff report is going to be primarily written by me. It's going to go through each issue. Let's say that we don't have anything requiring underground parking. It will go into the reasons why we decided not to do that, what analysis we did, and provide you with the arguments that we're effectively presenting to Planning Commission and City Council, why we decided not to go that way. Or why we decided X was a really good idea. So the staff report is the summary that you might be looking for. The next thing at some level, one of the attachments is going to be the actual zoning text. If we were doing a text amendment, which means we're changing text, you would have black text and then everything new would be in red text and you would have italics and strike throughs. Because most of what we're doing is completely brand new for the town, everything's going to be new. So I'm not totally sure how much of that you're going to have to deal with, but it's going to read like a municipal zoning code. It's going to say things like every building needs to have an 8-foot setback between this adjacent building, next point, and move on, and then be sectioned by issue. And that's kind of why we've set up these workshops to be broken down by issues, because that really reflects what you're gonna see in the zoning code eventually. The Planning Commission will review and discuss it first. They will have recommendations that they then will make to the City Council. So the next staff report that comes out of that will include what the Planning Commission said and then have another round of comments from me where we stand relative to the Planning Commission's recommendations. Was that a good idea? Should the council consider this? Should the council follow staff's recommendation instead? And that's then going to be discussed at the council level. Text amendments also require 2 hearings or even new text. So there will be a first reading where the council will consider everything, and then there will be a second reading where they will effectively go over any changes that they requested me to make, whether or not they like that cleanup. And really, depending on how many times they send me back, there could be another meeting there on and so forth. We are up against the deadline. While we're passing the deadline, we're up against a concern. We want to make sure that we get something done as fast as possible, but we also need to get something approved that's going to work. So just keeping that in context, if at any point you get confused in the process, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Even if we don't agree on everything, I'm here to help you understand the process and make sure that you get to participate in it. And with that, yes. So it's typically published the Friday in advance of the meeting or the Thursday in advance of the meeting. I'm hearing concerns that that's not really giving individuals enough time to digest it. So we'll look and see if we can advance it further or share it further in advance. No. At this point, we don't have any items scheduled for the housing element or the multifamily zoning code updates because we're waiting on CEQA. We really need to get the CEQA document out and published. And once we do that, we'll be able to tell you, hey, okay, now that we know what that 20 to 30-day window looks like, we can tell you what all the hearings are going to be queued up after that.
Special meetings. February 1st meeting, which is our regular meeting, and then the February 26th is a Monday. That's a special meeting, and then March 15th.
Yes, March 13th to 14th. That's a special meeting. Take items off the normal agenda because there's so much stuff coming before us. But that's not intended to be about. But you never know, but it's not intended.
But in March, there's, 6th, 13th, and 20th.
And the 21st is at 4 o'clock.
In February. Well, that's our regular schedule.
How about the 26th?
Okay. So I think the point is that because there are a lot of moving pieces in the town right now, there is potential for impacted council member or town council agendas. If you are watching for any other item other than the housing element, it's really in your interest right now to make sure that you're following the town's calendar, just in general, because there are potentially some special meetings that are going to be scheduled. Would you like to speak into a microphone so that the Zoom can capture it? Sorry.
Foot in my mouth. The special meetings on the 26th and the 13th, February 26th and March 13th are at 4 o'clock, but neither of those special meetings have housing elements in it. I guess we're going to cover other town business and do the housing element in the regular scheduled meetings. Okay, does that make sense? You think I did that?
Sorry for the confusion. Just to let you know, there's a lot of meetings that council has to do in order to try to get all of this discussed in the regular meetings.
So with that, I will close the meeting unless there's any, no, okay. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.